All right, man. Welcome to another episode of Subtopic. I'm your host, Subtopic. And as I mentioned in the previous video, or maybe that video hasn't come up, but I used to be a seventh grade mathematics teacher, and I love math, man. I think math is amazing. And so we have this problem here where we could ask several questions. We could say, what is the angle of A? What is the angle of B? And what is the angle of C? And what is the value of X? So these three, four questions that you could derive from a question that, you could look at something like this. And so one of the things we have to remember is that the sum of all angles in a triangle, and I think that symbol looks something like this, like an E. The sum of all angles, you know what, I'm not even going to bother. But the sum of all angles in a triangle adds up to 180. That's one thing that we have to remember. So if we're going to solve for X, we have degrees of A, that's 80 degrees. But we need to solve for X to get, what is the angle of C and what is the angle of B. So evidently the next question that we would answer in this, if you ever see something like this, would be find the angle or the value of X would be the very next thing we would have to solve for. And so what we would do here is we would begin combining like terms. Now, I'm somebody who I always like to have my equal sign on this side, never in the beginning. So I would always rewrite my equations. But what we need to do is we need to combine like terms. And so what does this mean? Well, you don't see here, but you have a 2. And so, this is a plus 2 that's adding to the 80. In other words, this plus 2 is part of an angle. And you have 6x. So when we combine the like terms, just because it doesn't have a degree doesn't mean we're not going to add it. It is part of it. So that is one thing you do have to consider. When you combine the like terms of everything that you have in this board or in this triangle here, you would have 14x because 8 plus 6 is 14 plus 82. Well, I think they kind of messed up here, but it's fine. We would combine. These are like terms. The 80 and the 2, right? You'll see in a minute. So we combine our like terms inside of a triangle, and all of this, this function would carry out, and it would equal our 180 degrees that we're trying to solve for. So what we would have to do from here is we're solving for X, so we have to do the opposite of what's going on here. So we're adding an 82, so we have to subtract 82. And what you do to one side of the equation, we would have to do to the other side. And so 180 minus 82 is 98. And thus removes this from this side. So now you're left with 14x. See that? 14. That's a 4. Okay. I'm using my mouse, so it's not that easy. Now notice how this 14x, this means this is a multiplying function. So you're multiplying. 14 times some number equals 98. Now, let's say you're not that fast at, well, what could it be, right? Is it a 7? Is it a 6, right? Well, let's carry out the opposite function. So we would have to divide by 14 in this case. And what you do to one side of the equation, you do to the other. 14. And in this case, x equals 98 divided by 14. And so from here, right, 14 can go into 9 no times. But 14 can go into 98 an amount of times. And at this point, if you don't have a calculator, it's okay to figure out how many times 14 could go into 98. But I'm always one who tends to round up. We're just one away from 15, and 15 and 15 is 30. And so 4 of those would give you 60. If 2 gives you 30, 4 of those gives you 60, then 6 of those would give you 90. So by that logic, right, if I'm just rounding up my numbers, 90 is the closest I could get, right, if dealing with 15s, or 15 times 6 in that case, because 2 15s gives you 30, 3 of those would give you 90, then maybe 14, this is a good place to start, 14 times 6 is 24, 6 and this, 6 and 2 is 8. So we can do better. So let's go up to the next one. 14 times 7. 7 times 4 is 28. And 7 plus 2 is 98. So 14 can go into 98 7 times. So x equals 7. And now we can carry out this function, right? Now we're free to solve for b and solve for c. All we would do is just substitute the 7 inside of the x and carry out following the rules of PEMDAS, right? You would have to, parentheses, exponents, all of that good stuff, right? As they appear left to right, right? As we're reading from left to right. So let's solve for b. Let me erase this. Okay. I wonder if they sell like a stylus, man, for like Windows or something, It would be cool to find out. Okay. So now we're going to solve for b. Now the function of b is 8x plus 2. Or once we're substituting the x, it would be 8 times 7 plus 2. And 8 times 7 is 56. And 56 plus 2 is 58. Therefore, b has to be 58. You see that? It has to be 58. Now, from here, you can do two things. Since we know that the sum of all angles is 180, and we have 80 and 58, in other words, that the addition of these two numbers, 80 plus 58, would give us some number. 8 plus 5 is 13. 138. You can solve for c if you know that the sum of all the angles is 180 by subtracting 138. Subtracting 138 from 180. And so you would carry out this function. This becomes a 7. This becomes a 10. This is a 2. 7 minus 3 is 4. So c has to be 42. It has to be. But we can test it. And in math, we always want to test. See if we're correct. If we said that x is 7 and we're going to substitute the value for x in here, in other words, this function is 6 times x, or in this case, 6 times 7, then 6 times 7 is indeed 42. And so this is how you solve these kind of questions. Algebraic questions, geometry, is it like combining two things here? I'm not too sure what the specific thing is here, but this is how you would do it to solve these kind of questions. So I would urge you, and I would always tell my students, right, try the problem by yourself again. See if you can recall the steps of how we did to solve this. I do apologize for the bad looking handwriting, man. I'm working with a mouse, so there's only so much you can do. But this would be the answer, right? So you can solve for all these things, right? And honestly, in a test, right, maybe it'll only ask for one question, maybe. But me, when I was a teacher, I would ask for everything. So I would ask for all these things, right? If I was missing all of them, you can need multiple. you can get 4 questions from one, from one problem. So that's pretty cool. That's all I have for today, man. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe. But here we do all kinds of things. So hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification, hit the like button. Leave a comment if you want to. And I'll see you all in the next one, man. Peace.